Well, Atlanta getting some attention this week. The SEC Media Days up and running for us here in the ATL, and the conference loaded once again with several national contenders and maybe coming with a chip on their shoulder because the conference, check this out, they haven't reached a national championship game in back-to-back years for the first time in 20 years. Hard to believe when we're talking SEC, but don't tell the commissioner, Greg Sankey, that. He views it a little differently in sharing that this morning.
There is joy embedded in what we do, and we take pride in what was accomplished last year. Our first as a 16-member, what I think is a super conference. For all of those of you who like to speculate about super conferences, welcome to one.
Okay, super conference, that is the word on the streets there in the ATL, at least for the next couple of days. Take a look at it. This is how it lines up for all the teams speaking this week, starting today with LSU, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Vandy, some names out there, Auburn, Alabama, and others throughout the week. We got some boots on the ground, the ATL, to kind of shake everything loose for us. Damien Harris and Josh Pate there with all the bells and whistles. And you guys just heard the commissioner calling this a super conference when it comes to the SEC. A few years ago, you could say that. But as you guys know, the playing field is a little bit different. Josh, your thoughts on what the commissioner said there?
Yeah, I saw a lot of people, Damien, that reacted when he said it. Like, oh, my goodness, did you hear what Greg Sankey said? I'm like, well, what was the controversial part? They said, well, he called it a super conference. And I asked one guy over here, we were doing radio a little while ago, I said, if 16 is not a super conference, what in the world's a super conference? Like, what's the magic number we have to get to? 20? One of the biggest gripes around the league right now is, oh, you don't get to play everybody in the conference. And that's even if you go to 9 league games, you don't get to play everyone. So certainly from a revenue standpoint, from a brand recognition standpoint, it's been a super conference for a long time. But 16 teams, man, that more than meets the requirements in my mind for what constitutes a super conference.
It's almost like you can't fit any more teams in there at this point. But again, to your point, the SEC has been a super conference for a long time, whether it's from fandom, whether it's from revenue that's generated. I mean, yes, you add 16 teams or you have 16 teams in total. Yeah, it's a super conference. But let's not forget, the SEC has been a dominant conference in college football for years and years on end. And just because they're adding in more teams now, it doesn't make it any difference. It's still a conference where you're going to see competition at the highest level. You're going to see the best level of players, and nothing's going to change.
We'll see how that changes for the 16 teams in that super conference there. Let's start with some of the names that we will be highlighting throughout the year here at Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, able to reload through the portal. We've seen that in the past with them. But, Damien, I'm curious, what are you watching with the Rebels this year?
I'm looking for what's going to happen at the quarterback position. I mean, we've got Austin Simmons stepping in, being the starting quarterback for Ole Miss. And how is that relationship going to be with Lane Kiffin? We know that Lane loves to get his quarterbacks, and he loves to hand them the keys to a high-powered offense with explosive weapons on the outside, a good run game, and just hand him the keys and let him go out and make those big plays. Well, can Austin Simmons do that? He hasn't gone out and proved himself yet. We don't know if that relationship with Lane Kiffin is going to be a great relationship yet, but if it can be, I do expect to see some of the same high-powered offensive characteristics from this Ole Miss team because we know Lane Kiffin can draw them up with the absolute best of them.
And well, to further that point, they have to, because a lot of what's been lost in all the Austin Simmons conversation is this was a really good defensive team last year.
Absolutely.
They got after the quarterback last year. They were able to generate pressure. They were able to turn the ball over. And so, you know, when you talk about, as you did, what Austin Simmons can do, I think a lot of people are doing that in a vacuum. I'm doing it in the broader context of there could be weeks where they got to hang 38, 42, Absolutely. 43 points. And so, like, that's what has to be hot out of the gate because this is a team, Damien, that in universal fashion is viewed as having underachieved last year, and they won 9 games in the regular season.
Absolutely.
So it's not just little Ole Miss anymore, you know, make a solid bowl game. You're attaching big-time playoff expectations to a guy in Austin Simmons who hasn't started games yet and who's got to carry a lot more of the load because defense is going to regress for him. I just don't know how much it's going to regress.
And I even want to add something else. When you talk about expectations, like we're trying to see Lane Kiffin get over that hump.
Yeah.
He's always won the games that he was supposed to win. Every now and then he might get a win. Georgia last year that you're not supposed to win. But when are we going to see Lane Kiffin really start to emerge himself as the coach of a program that wins all of the big games? They win the games they're supposed to win, the games that maybe they don't have the best chance of winning, then they get themselves to the playoffs, then they start to open up the opportunities for championships.
He went 5-3 last year. in the SEC, and one of those games on the schedule, you can look at September 27th against the LSU Tigers. Brian Kelly, of course, taking over there and still continue this maybe towards a contender. But what are you watching here, Josh, with LSU?
I think about how just unbalanced the stat sheet looked last year. Sometimes that box score, Damien, it doesn't tell you the whole story. But from a season-long perspective with LSU last year, you want to know how they can look as good as they did at times and then get blown out other times. It's because they couldn't run the ball consistently. And you know better than anyone, it doesn't have to be that you're averaging 8 yards per carry. It doesn't have to be that you're putting up 250 per game. But LSU didn't even commit to it last year. And so you got a passing game in the aggregate that is really good, top 20 passing numbers, and they're in the 100s in rushing statistics. And it's kind of been a prolonged issue at LSU, but it was really, really bad last year. And I look at the caliber of athlete that's come through there. I look at the caliber of athlete that's there right now. I look at Brian Kelly's history as a coach. And, well, like, where is there any excuse for them not to at least be average running the ball? And then the reason I mention that is because if you're asking me expectations for them, everything works downstream of the answer to the following question. Can LSU run the ball decently this year? Just decently. If they can contend for a playoff because they got a good quarterback. They got good personnel elsewhere.
And the biggest problem with everything that you just said is it wasn't like last season. They didn't have a guy that was capable of being that workhorse guy. Granted, K. Durham was a freshman last year, but he put up over 750 yards. He averaged over 5 yards a carry. I mean, this is a guy that can handle that workload. He's a tough physical guy. He's smaller. He's got a more compact frame, so he can handle that heavy workload. And I can truly say in my heart of hearts, if they give him that workload, if they allow him to take that next step to being one of the premier backs in the SEC in year 2, I think that makes this offense look completely different than what they do if they're just relying on Garrett Nussmeier getting the ball around and using the passing game to beat defenses.
I think also there may have been a mentality down there because they had been so poor defensively the year before that, man, like we're almost starting the game in pinball fashion. We're starting the game knowing we got to keep up, we got to keep up, we got to keep up, which sort of leads to a point that we're probably not going to talk a lot about here, but Blake Baker, year 2 as the defensive coordinator there. If you get sort of there what they're getting at USC, that steady quantum improvement defensively, well, it probably changes your philosophy a little bit. It changes the mentality of an offensive play caller, what I'm going to need going into a game. Maybe it looks a little bit more like LSU football is supposed to look this year.
Guys, I want to take a look at, too, when you talk about some of the road games they have to face, right off the bat, you start there with Clemson. Outside of that, you have Alabama on the schedule. You have Oklahoma at the end of the season. Just some of those tough games. On top of that, Ole Miss as well. Like, how, when you look at this, how tricky of a road could this be for the Tigers when you mentioned, of course, taking that next step as a contender?
Damien, I'm looking at week 1. It's not a conference game, but it's been a long time since LSU won a game in week 1. And so from a purely mental standpoint, I think about a hard-fought, like 27-24 win, final gun there in the other Death Valley at Clemson, and I think about what that would do for them. Doesn't even matter in the league standings.
Absolutely.
If you lose that game, you're not out of anything, but what it would mean for them to win that game and sort of the validation that it would be to a lot of the questions you and I are asking right now.
Absolutely.
They're not beating Clemson if they don't have what we're talking about.
Well, and I think that how important it is to start off the season the right way. Obviously, you alluded to the fact that LSU hasn't won a season opener in how many years, but this is a game for LSU that is going to send their program in one of two directions, in my opinion. You go to Clemson, you handle business, you win this game, then any road game coming up on your schedule, whether it's Alabama, whether it's whoever, you have the confidence, because guess what? That's how we started the season. We've been here before. We have the confidence to go on the road and beat a team with a good coach, with good players. But if you go to Death Valley, you go to Clemson, you put out a bad performance, and it looks like you're still trying to figure these things out, well, then once you get later in the season, you revert back to what you've already done. And that goes back to uncertainty. That goes back to lack of confidence being on the road. So this season opener for LSU, it's important for every team to start off the season the right way. But this LSU team with Garrett Nussmeier, with Brian Kelly being on the ropes because he hasn't necessarily reached that level of success that we expected yet, this season opener against Clemson is going to be imperative.
The Tigers have work to do over in South Carolina. I think it's safe to say that Shane Beamer and Lenore Sellers, they're not going to be sneaking up on anybody this year as they did a season ago. But what does their outlook look like in 2025 for you, Josh?
Man, that was a memorable season last year.
Yes, it was.
And you got some close losses, or else they're a playoff team.
Absolutely.
And we're already speaking of them in sort of rarefied air. But imagine if that LSU game goes differently, if that Bama game goes differently. God forbid if both of them go differently.
Right.
I look at them, and people are talking about Shane Beamer in South Carolina with the kind of language that we're not used to.
Yes.
You came up in this league. I grew up watching this league. There's some brands, no matter who the coach is, that are always kind of there, and they get benefit of doubt. Yes. South Carolina's not been one of those.
Correct.
So now they're in that conversation this year, and it all has to do with Lenore Sellers, because it almost is like, as long as he is the stud that he can be, people are willing to overlook the defensive departures to the NFL. People are kind of willing to overlook the lack of proven production at receiver. That's not how the game really works. Like, I'm looking at that stuff, but I'm just thinking about, for a second, if we can pause before toe meets leather in week 1 and appreciate where Shane Beamer has him, like, I think it's worth that. Then when live bullets start flying in the fall, that's when we ask the questions that we were just asking there. Sellers has got the shot to be the best quarterback in the country, though.
He absolutely does. And I would make the same remarks about Dylan Stewart that you're making about Lenore Sellers. People are overlooking these defensive departures because they know that they've got a generational defensive end in Dylan Stewart that can single-handedly save a game. He won't even let the ball get to the linebacker level or to the safety level. And I think with him, something that we're really going to have to pay attention to is he doesn't have Kyle Kennard on the other side. So when you've got 2 stud defensive ends, you can't just send all your linemen at one guy. But this year, that's going to be Dylan Stewart's life every single week. Can he still be productive? Can he take a leap in year 2? And again, can he cover up some of the holes that are in this South Carolina defense? Because we know that's what great players can do. A Von Miller, an Aaron Donald, a guy that has kind of the hype and the notoriety around their name this early in their career, like Dylan Stewart, he can do that. But again, there are those holes, there are those concerns. So they need guys like Lenore Seller on offense. They need those guys like Dylan Stewart on defense to kind of cover up some of the holes that they don't have at other spots.
Think about what we just said. What we just said is there is a world where South Carolina has the best offensive and defensive player in this league this year.
Yep.
That's why the expectations are where they are.
Absolutely.
The Gamecocks finished 15th in the CFP voting when it comes to that in those rankings there. They made a leap. Vanderbilt trying to do the same thing what we saw last year. Not the same Vandy that we've seen in the past, guys. But Josh, your thoughts on what's the buzz and what the Commodores can actually do this season?
So the conversation around them it's almost like talking about golf, because people talk about one player. They talk about Diego Pavia, and with good reason, obviously. I just wonder, like, already we're talking about Vanderbilt the way we haven't really spoken about them in some people's lifetimes. If you're pretty young watching this, you've never even heard Vanderbilt given time to be talked about at a national level on SEC Media Days when they're here. So my question is, you've got the highest paid coaching staffs in America. The highest paid defensive staffs in America are in this league. So the big question is always, when you burst on the scene, Vandy or otherwise, and then you give the best defensive minds in the sport an entire winter, spring, and summer to adjust to you, how do you handle the adjustments the next season? That's why we have the term sophomore slump because of that. He's not a sophomore. It's like 30 years old. But the follow-up campaign a lot of times doesn't deliver because of that. So I want to know, like, does he buck that trend?
Well, and I want to piggyback off something you said. All this conversation we're having about Vandy, let's not forget this is because they won one game.
Sure.
It's because of one game that they won. If they don't beat Alabama and you substitute another team in that position and they have the same record, we're not having this conversation even about Diego Pavia. But what I will say is, with everything that you said about Diego Pavia having the opportunity to have a slump, people having an opportunity to get a beat on his game to prepare for him, now it's up to everybody else around him, because Diego Pavia has been on a mission since he arrived in Vanderbilt to set a culture, to set a precedent, to be an example and say, hey, look at me, guys. This is the culture we need to have. This is the culture that we need to build. So yes, all eyes are on Diego Pavia, but now are the guys going to step up around him and embrace that culture, embrace the struggle, embrace the fact that, hey, we are Vanderbilt and people are going to look at us a certain way, but we've got a fearless leader and we need to rise to the occasion. If they can do that around him, then I think that alleviates some of the pressure for him and then allows them to have a better season. But that's how these programs, that's how cultures truly start. The Alabamas, the Floridas, all those great programs of years, that's how they get started.
Damien, I'm surprised you brought up that game. I was going to leave it alone. That's why I didn't even mention it in my introduction. I'm surprised you brought it up. I thought he was leaving things in the past. So, as always, fellas.
I'm an honest guy.
Okay. Damien and Josh, appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the day there, SEC Media Days, and the rest of the week as well. When it comes to the odds winning the conference here, Texas the favorites with Arch Manning there at plus 280. Then we find Kirby in Georgia at 290. There's Bama at 480. LSU at 7-1, and A&M at 15-1 is your top 5 when it comes to those odds in the SEC.